The sky burned red over the ruined city as the alien guards dragged prisoners through the broken streets. Smoke rose from shattered buildings, carrying the scent of blood and ash. Among the captives was a young alien woman with emerald green skin and long crimson hair, her wrists bound in heavy iron shackles. She held a small child close to her chest, shielding him from the cold wind. Her name was Kara, and she knew the soldiers were taking her to the execution grounds, the humans. In the prison convoy walked with their heads low, silent and beaten. Most were captured soldiers, chained together by thick metal links. Among them was a tall man with bruises on his face and blood on his shirt. His name was Daniel, and he had been fighting for 3 months without rest before being captured. He kept his eyes on the ground, but his mind was awake, watching, waiting for a moment to act. Kara's child, barely 3 years old, clung to her torn clothes. His skin was a softer shade of green, his eyes wide with fear. She whispered to him in her native tongue, promising that she would protect him no matter what happened. Deep inside, she feared it was a promise she could not keep. The guards had orders to kill them both before sunset, to send a message to all rebels who defied the Empire. The column of prisoners moved through the shadow of tall, half-destroyed towers. People hiding in the ruins dared not speak, but their eyes followed the captives. Every step Kara took felt heavier, her legs weakened from hunger and exhaustion. She had been a slave for 5 years, forced to work in mines where the air choked her lungs and the chains tore her skin. She had never imagined she would end her life in this way, walking toward death with her child in her arms. Daniel noticed the way the guards pushed Kara harder than the others. He saw how she tried to keep the child safe, even when her own body was failing. Something in her struggle lit a spark inside him. She was not his species, not from his world, but in her eyes he saw the same fire that had kept him alive through every battle. He began counting the guards, memorizing their positions, and noting the weapons they carried. As they approached the edge of the city, the sounds of battle echoed faintly from far away. Somewhere beyond the hills, the war was still raging. The Empire was winning, but the resistance was not yet dead. Daniel knew that if there was any chance to escape, it would have to be now, before they reached the execution site where escape would be impossible. He tightened his fists, feeling the cold bite of the chains around his wrists. One of the guards struck Kara with the butt of his rifle when she stumbled. Daniel's jaw clenched and his heart pounded faster. She did not cry out, only tightened her hold on the child. The boy's small eyes filled with tears, but he stayed silent, knowing any sound could bring more pain. Daniel took a deep breath, feeling the weight of a decision pressing down on him like the chains on his arms. He had no weapon, he had no plan. But he had one chance, and if he took it, he might save not just himself, but the alien mother and her child. His muscles tensed as his eyes scanned the road ahead, searching for the right moment. The guards laughed, unaware that one human among their prisoners was already deciding how to break every chain in front of him. The cold wind tore through the cracked walls as the guards marched their prisoners out of the ruined streets. Daniel's eyes kept moving, tracking every step, every twitch of the soldiers' hands on their rifles. He could feel the chain biting into his wrists with each pull, but his mind was already running ahead, imagining the moment he would make his move. Kara stumbled again, her bare feet scraping over sharp stone. Yet she kept the child close to her chest as if nothing else in the world mattered more than that little life. One guard barked an order in a guttural alien tongue and shoved Daniel forward. The blow nearly sent him to his knees, but he caught himself. He forced his breathing to stay calm, knowing he would need every bit of strength soon. The dirt road narrowed between two collapsed buildings, forming a choke point where the guards bunched closer together. Daniel's instincts told him this would be the first and last opening. Before they reached the open field of the execution grounds, Kara's child shifted in her arms, his small hand brushing her jaw. She gave him a weak smile, her lips trembling, but her gaze steady. Daniel saw it and felt something deep in his chest tighten. He had seen courage in many forms before, but this was different. This was a mother standing against death without a weapon, without hope, yet refusing to let fear claim her eyes. It made his decision unshakable. He would not let her die here. The guard nearest to Daniel carried a shock baton on his belt. Daniel measured the distance, his heart beating faster. He glanced up at the sky, seeing the faint glimmer of an Empire patrol drone circling above. If the drone caught sight of what he was planning, their deaths would come even quicker. But hesitation was not an option. He shifted his weight, loosening his stride so the chain between him and the next prisoner sagged slightly. Every small change mattered now. A sharp gust of wind blew dust into the guard's eyes. One of them cursed loudly, raising a hand to shield his face. It was the distraction Daniel needed. He surged forward, yanking the chain with all his strength, and slamming his shoulder into the guard with the baton. The alien stumbled back, his grip loosening just enough for Daniel to rip the weapon free. The nearest prisoners froze, shocked by the sudden burst of movement. Daniel's voice cut through the air in a fierce shout, telling them to move. Kara's eyes widened as Daniel spun, striking the second guard hard across the jaw with the baton. The alien crumpled to the ground. Daniel stepped in front of Kara without thinking, using his body to block a third guard's line of fire. The rifle barked, the round sizzling past Daniel's ear and striking the wall behind him. The sound made the child bury his face against Kara's neck, trembling. Daniel lunged forward, slamming the baton into the rifle, knocking it from the soldier's hands before swinging again to drop him to his knees. The prisoners started shouting, some pulling at their chains, others rushing to help. A human soldier at the back grabbed a fallen alien's blade and began hacking at the links binding him. Daniel kept moving, striking, shoving, using the narrow alley to keep the guards from surrounding them. Kara turned her body so the child was always shielded. Her breath came in sharp bursts, but her eyes stayed fixed on the human fighting for their lives. For the first time in years, she felt something close to hope. One final guard rushed Daniel. With a blade drawn, Daniel sidestepped, grabbed the attacker's arm, and twisted hard. The alien's scream echoed through the alley as the weapon fell. Daniel's kick sent him crashing into a pile of rubble. Without wasting a heartbeat, Daniel knelt beside Kira, smashing the baton down on the chains binding her wrists until the metal bent and snapped. He held out his hand, his eyes locking with hers in silent urgency. She gripped his palm tightly, the strength in her grasp matching his own. Daniel pulled Kara to her feet as the last guard groaned in the dust. The child clung to her shoulder, his small fingers digging into the fabric of her torn cloak. Daniel checked the alley mouth and saw the patrol drone turning in a slow circle above the rooftops. Its lens winked like a cold eye in the smoke. He knew the drone had seen the fight. He knew soldiers would be coming fast. He pointed to a broken service tunnel door and told Kara to run there now. They reached the rusted door and found it sealed by a bent steel bar. Daniel jammed the shock baton under the bar and leveraged the weight of his body. The metal squealed, then snapped free with a sharp crack. Kara slipped through first with the child. Daniel followed and dragged the bar back into place from inside. The tunnel stank of damp earth and old oil. Darkness pressed close, but it also gave them cover against the sky. Kara breathed hard as she steadied the boy on her hip. She thanked Daniel in a voice that shook and then grew firm. She said she had a name and wanted him to use it. Daniel nodded and told her his name in return. He kept his words short to save breath. He asked if she knew this tunnel. She said the miners used it long ago to move ore carts beneath the streets. She said it might lead to the dry riverbed at the city edge. Boots pounded above them as squads spread through the ruins. The echo traveled down through cracks in the stones like thunder. Daniel kept a fast pace, counting steps in his head too. Stay calm. He listened for the hum of more drones and the clatter of rifles. The tunnel sloped downward and the ground grew slick. He took the child for a few minutes to let Kara rest her arms. The boy studied his face with wary curiosity and then hid against his chest. They reached a junction where 3 passages met in a black knot. One path breathed cool air that smelled faintly of ash. Another carried the wet stink of stagnant water. The third was silent, and the dust on its floor was undisturbed. Daniel crouched and touched the earth with his fingers. He felt faint tremors from the first path and guessed it ran beneath an active street. He chose the second path because moving water could hide their noise. Kara stepped close and spoke quietly while they walked. She said she had worked in the mines until the soldiers claimed she was helping the rebels. She said they killed anyone who argued. She said the charge was only an excuse to make fear grow. Daniel told her he had lost his unit during a night raid and woke in chains 2 days later. He said fear was the weapon the Empire liked the most. He said they would deny it while using it on everyone. Water lapped against broken stone as the tunnel opened into an old drainage chamber. A grate blocked the outlet, its bars rusted but thick. Daniel tested the welds with the baton and found a weak point near the base. He smashed it again and again until a bar bent outward. Kara passed the child through the gap and then squeezed after him. Daniel crawled last and pulled the bent bar back to hide their trail. Cold air and pale daylight greeted them from the dry riverbed beyond. They crouched under a collapsed bridge while Daniel studied the city rim. Smoke columns rose from the heart of the ruins. Patrols crisscrossed the open ground between the last buildings and the outer fields. A supply truck idled near a gate where guards scanned the horizon. Daniel mapped the pattern of their movement and found a short blind window when the truck blocked the gate camera during refueling. He told Kara they would run to the shadow of the silo when the truck shifted forward and turned its nose to the west. The truck lurched. The camera's view swept away. Daniel grabbed Kara's hand and sprinted, keeping his body between her and the gate. The child clung tight and did not cry. Gravel slid under their feet as they darted behind crates, and then threw themselves into the silo shadow. Shouts flared behind them as a guard finally looked up and saw motion near the fence. A spotlight flashed across the yard and missed by a breath. Daniel pointed to a maintenance ladder hidden in the silo ribs and began to climb toward the catwalk with the promise of a path. Beyond the wall, Daniel's hands gripped the cold steel of the ladder as he climbed. The metal groaned faintly under his weight, but it held firm. Kara followed close behind, keeping the child pressed to her chest. The boy's small arms locked around her neck, his eyes scanning the lights below. Daniel reached the catwalk first and scanned the horizon. Beyond the wall lay open fields shrouded in mist, and beyond them, the dark outline of forest. It was their best chance for cover. He helped Kara onto the catwalk and kept his body between her and the searchlights. The wind was sharper here, cutting through their thin clothes. Daniel moved quickly to the maintenance hatch at the far end, forcing the rusted latch open with a grunt. The hatch led to a narrow platform on the outside of the wall. A thin maintenance beam ran along its length, just wide enough for one person at a time. Kara looked down at the dizzying drop, but stepped forward without hesitation. Halfway across, a shout rose from below. Daniel's head snapped toward the gate, where a guard pointed upward. The beam vibrated under his boots as Kara quickened her pace. A rifle cracked, and a round sparked against the metal inches from Daniel's hand. He dropped low, moving fast and keeping his profile small. The far side of the beam ended at a rusted ladder bolted to the wall. Daniel climbed down fast, the cold rungs biting his palms. Kara reached the ground moments later. Daniel took the child from her so she could move freely. He turned toward the misty field, feeling the wet grass under his boots. Behind them, alarms blared, and spotlights began sweeping the wall. The first beam of light cut across the field, slicing through the mist like a knife. Daniel motioned for Kara to run in a zigzag to make the shots harder. They darted between low hills, their breath sharp in the cold air. The forest edge loomed ahead, dark and silent. Daniel pushed harder, his legs burning. A shot rang out, and a puff of soil exploded near his foot. He dove behind a fallen log, pulling Kara and the child down beside him. The guards' voices were faint now, lost in the distance, but the threat was not over. Daniel waited for the light sweeps to move away before signaling Kara to follow him deeper into the trees. The mist thinned, replaced by the damp scent of leaves and soil. Inside the forest, the darkness was heavier, but it brought safety from the lights. Daniel slowed their pace to listen for pursuit. Kara adjusted the child in her arms and glanced back toward the wall. Her voice was low when she asked if they had truly escaped. Daniel said they were free of the city for now, but the Empire's patrols could still find them. He said they needed to keep moving until daylight. She nodded without argument, her grip tightening on the boy. They moved along a narrow game trail, winding between thick trunks. Daniel's senses stayed sharp, marking every sound. The forest was alive with faint movements, rustling leaves, distant calls of unseen creatures. The child stirred in Kara's arms, restless but silent. Daniel stopped at a small clearing where a stream trickled over smooth stones. He knelt to cup water into his hands and passed it to Kara. She drank, then helped the boy drink, her eyes softening as his small hands clutched hers. Daniel crouched to study the tracks near the stream. Some were fresh to ignore. They were boot prints, pressed deep into the mud, heading toward the city wall. Whoever made them was moving in the opposite direction, and that meant they might have crossed paths soon. He motioned to Kara to stay low and follow quietly. She shifted the child to her back, using a strip of cloth from her cloak, freeing her hands to move quickly. Together they slipped back into the shadows of the trail ahead. The night grew colder, and the sounds of pursuit faded. Daniel allowed them a brief stop beneath a dense canopy where moonlight barely touched the ground. He told Kara they could rest here for a short while before moving again. She sat with the child curled against her, her eyes fixed on the trees as if watching for danger. Daniel kept to the edge of the clearing, scanning the forest with the soldiers. Patience. Somewhere beyond the mist and trees, freedom waited. But so did the Empire's reach. Daniel stayed awake while Kara and the child rested under the thick canopy. The forest was quieter here, but he knew silence could be dangerous. He kept his ears open for the sound of boots, drones, or the faint hum of a scout vehicle. The air was damp, and every breath carried the scent of moss and rain. When Kara stirred, her eyes met his, and she gave a small nod. Ready to move again, they followed a narrow trail deeper into the woods, using the cover of thick ferns and hanging vines. The child now walked between them, holding both their hands. Daniel kept glancing back, making sure no one was following. Kara moved with the cautious grace of someone used to surviving in dangerous places. She pointed out certain plants they should avoid touching and showed Daniel where the ground was too soft to hold their weight. Her knowledge of the land was keeping them alive. The sound of rushing water grew louder as they moved. Soon they reached a river that cut across their path, its surface gleaming under the moonlight. The current was strong, and the water reached Daniel's waist when he stepped in to test it. Kara hesitated, looking at the child. Daniel told her he would carry the boy on his shoulders while she crossed behind him. She nodded, and together they began the slow, cold walk through the river. Halfway across, a branch snapped on the far bank. Daniel froze, his eyes searching the shadows. Kara's gaze locked on a dark shape moving between the trees. It was not a guard, it was too small and moved too fast. The figure stepped into the moonlight, revealing an alien man with a ragged coat and a bow in his hands. His eyes narrowed at the sight of them, and he drew an arrow without a word. Daniel raised his hands, showing he held no weapon ready. The stranger spoke in a low, tense voice, asking who they were and why they were crossing his territory. Kara answered in the same language, explaining that they were fleeing from the city and the Empire's soldiers. The stranger's expression changed slightly, but the bow stayed aimed at Daniel's chest. The river's cold bit into Daniel's legs, but he stood still, letting Kara's words do the work. Finally, the man lowered the bow and gestured for them to come ashore. Daniel helped Kara climb the slippery bank and lifted the boy down from his shoulders. The stranger studied them for a long moment before speaking again. He said the Empire's patrols had been sweeping the forest for days, and that they would not stop until they had found every fugitive. He offered them shelter in his camp for the night, but warned that leaving at first light was the only safe choice. They followed him through a twisting path lined with fallen logs and thick undergrowth. The camp was hidden beneath an overhang of rock, shielded on three sides by tall bushes. A small fire burned in the center, giving off just enough heat to fight the cold without drawing attention. Kara settled beside the flames with the child, warming his hands. Daniel stood a little apart, scanning the shadows beyond the fire's reach. The stranger moved quietly, adding more wood to the flames. As they ate a small meal of dried fruit and tough bread, the stranger asked Daniel if he was a soldier. Daniel said yes, but added that he was now just another prisoner trying to stay alive. Kara listened quietly, her eyes on the boy who was slowly drifting to sleep. The stranger told them of other escapees who had tried to reach the mountains, but never made it. The Empire's reach, he said, was longer than anyone wanted to believe. Later, when the fire had burned low, Daniel spoke softly to Kara. He told her that staying in one place too long was dangerous, even if it meant resting. She agreed, saying that every moment they delayed gave the soldiers more time to close in. They decided to leave before sunrise, using the darkness to mask their path. Daniel lay down with his back to the rock wall, keeping his ears tuned to the sounds of the forest. The night would be short, and the morning would bring new dangers. Before the first light touched the trees, Daniel was already awake. The air was cold enough to sting his skin, and mist clung to the ground like a living thing. He shook Kara gently, and she opened her eyes without hesitation. The child stirred but did not cry, his small fingers clutching at her cloak. The stranger from the camp stood nearby, his bow slung across his shoulder. He reminded them that the patrols would already be on the move, and pointed toward a narrow path leading uphill into the deeper forest. Daniel thanked him with a firm nod before stepping onto the trail. Kara followed close behind, her steps careful but quick. The boy rode on her back, wrapped in the cloth sling she had made from her tattered cloak. The forest seemed different in the early hours, quieter, but with a heavy weight in the air. Every crack of a twig or rustle in the leaves made Daniel glance over his shoulder. The Empire's hunters could be anywhere. As the path climbed higher, the trees grew older and thicker, their roots twisting across the ground like the bones of some ancient beast. Kara pointed out faint carvings on a trunk, symbols from her people's old language. She explained they marked safe routes once used by miners and traders long before the Empire came. Daniel studied them closely, committing their shapes to memory in case they needed to navigate alone. The knowledge might mean the difference between life and death. A distant hum began to cut through the quiet. Daniel froze and raised his hand for Kara to stop. The sound grew louder until it was clear, a drone's engine slicing the air above the treetops. Daniel motioned for them to move off the trail and into the dense undergrowth. They crouched low as a black insect-like machine drifted overhead, its lens sweeping the forest floor. The hum faded after a minute, but Daniel kept them hidden until he was certain it was gone. When they returned to the trail, Kara's steps were faster. She whispered that the drones never traveled alone, and that soldiers would soon follow the machine's path. Daniel agreed and set a harder pace. The climb grew steep, and the air grew thinner. He could hear Kara's breathing grow heavier, so he offered to carry the boy for a while. She hesitated, then passed him over. The boy rested his head against Daniel's shoulder, his small hands gripping tightly for balance. By midday, they reached a ridge that overlooked the land beyond the forest. From here, Daniel could see rolling hills stretching toward the hazy outline of the mountains. Somewhere in those peaks lay the resistance hideouts he had heard about in the prison camp. Kara joined him at the ridge, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the horizon. She asked if that was where they would be safe. Daniel told her it was safer than anywhere else they could reach without being caught. They descended from the ridge into a valley where the trees grew sparse. The ground was softer here, damp from hidden springs. Daniel stopped when he saw fresh tracks heavier than the ones near the stream before. These were soldier boots, and there were many of them. Kara's jaw tightened, and she shifted the boy higher on her back. Daniel motioned for silence and began leading them along a winding path through tall grass, using the wind to cover their movement. A sudden shout split the air, followed by the snap of a branch. Daniel spun to see two soldiers breaking from the trees, rifles in hand. He shoved Kara toward a cluster of boulders and drew the stolen shot baton from his belt. The first soldier charged, and Daniel met him head-on, slamming the baton into his side. The second soldier fired, the shot scorching the ground near Kara's feet. She ducked behind the rocks, clutching the boy tightly. Daniel lunged forward and struck again, sending the second man sprawling. The forest fell silent except for their breathing. Daniel searched the fallen soldiers, taking a rifle and a small pack of supplies. He tossed the pack to Kara, telling her to take only what they could carry without slowing down. She nodded and passed him the boy, then slung the pack over her shoulder. Without another word, they pressed on toward the far end of the valley. Somewhere ahead, the mountains waited, and with them the faint promise of freedom. Daniel led the way through the narrow pass that opened at the far edge of the valley. The rocks here were jagged, and the ground sloped unevenly, forcing them to watch every step. Kara kept close behind him, the boy once again secured to her. Back, the cold air flowing from the mountains carried the scent of snow and stone. Daniel knew the terrain would slow them down, but it would also make it harder for soldiers to track their movements. The pass curved sharply before widening into a rocky plain. Sparse patches of grass clung to the cracks between stones, and small streams trickled from the cliffs above. Daniel paused to scan the horizon, spotting faint movement along the far ridge. At this distance, he could not be sure if they were animals or patrols, but he decided to treat them as a threat. He guided Kara toward a narrow gully that would hide them from view until they reached the other side. Inside the gully, shadows swallowed most of the light. The walls were high and close, damp with the spray from unseen springs. Kara's steps echoed softly, and the boy shifted in his sling. With a quiet sigh, Daniel kept his voice low as he explained that the gully might lead to an old mountain trail used by traders before the Empire came. If they found it, they could reach the high slopes without being seen from the valley below. They moved steadily until a faint metallic clink made Daniel raise his hand. He crouched and scanned the rocks ahead. A thin wire stretched across the path, almost invisible in the gloom. It was a trap likely connected to a small explosive or an alarm. Kara froze when she saw it, her eyes tightening. Daniel eased forward, using the end of his shot baton to lift the wire away from its anchor. He worked slowly until the tension eased and the wire sagged harmlessly to the ground. Beyond the trap, the gully opened into a small plateau where a single dead tree stood. Daniel approached it cautiously, checking for more traps. Finding none, he motioned for Kara to rest beneath its twisted branches. The boy slid down from her back and stretched his legs, looking around with quiet curiosity. Kara unwrapped a small portion of the dried food from the stranger's pack and handed half to Daniel. They ate quickly, their eyes always scanning the ridges above. As they prepared to move on, a faint rumble reached them from deeper in the mountains. At first, Daniel thought it was thunder, but the steady rhythm told him otherwise. It was the sound of engines. He pointed toward the north, where the sound seemed to grow louder. Kara's face tightened as she recognized it too. The Empire's scout vehicles could travel these rocky paths faster than soldiers on foot. They had to put more distance between themselves and the sound. Daniel led them along the plateau's edge until they found a narrow crack in the rock wall. It was just wide enough for a person to squeeze through, and it led to a winding tunnel carved long ago by water. The air was cold and still, and the floor was slick under their boots. They followed the tunnel until it began to slope upward, the faint glimmer of daylight showing ahead. Daniel hoped it would open onto a high ledge where they could see the land ahead without exposing themselves. The tunnel ended in a narrow opening that overlooked a steep drop. From here, Daniel could see the forest they had crossed, now distant and partly hidden by mist. The mountains rose higher behind them, and somewhere beyond the next ridge, the peaks vanished into clouds. Kara stepped beside him, her hand resting lightly on the boy's shoulder. She asked if they were close to safety. Daniel told her they were closer than they had ever been since leaving the city, but they were not safe yet. They descended from the ledge along a winding goat path that clung to the mountainside. The drop to their left was sheer, but the path was narrow enough to hide their tracks from above. Daniel set a steady pace, determined to reach the next ridge before nightfall. Kara followed without complaint, her eyes focused ahead. The boy clung to her, silent but alert. Somewhere beyond that ridge, Daniel hoped they would finally find a place where the Empire's shadow could not reach them. The wind grew stronger as they reached the next ridge, carrying with it the faint scent of wood smoke. Daniel stopped and crouched low, scanning the valleys below. Between two jagged peaks, he saw the faint glimmer of lights, too small to be a city, but too steady to be random fires. Kara came beside him, her eyes narrowing. She asked if it could be the Resistance. Daniel said it might be, but it could just as easily be an Imperial outpost meant to lure fugitives into a trap. They moved down the ridge with deliberate care, using every boulder and shadow for cover. The boy rode quietly on Daniel's back now, his head resting against the human's shoulder. The rocky slope gave way to a patch of evergreens, their needles whispering in the cold air. Somewhere far off, the engines they had heard earlier faded into silence. Daniel hoped it meant the patrol had turned away, but he knew better than to trust luck alone. The path through the trees was narrow and uneven, forcing them to move in single file. Kara kept glancing over her shoulder, her instincts as sharp as his. Every so often, she touched the small dagger she had taken from the soldier in the valley. Daniel noticed and gave her a small nod of approval. It wasn't much, but a blade was better than empty hands if trouble came. The boy stirred, sensing the tension, but made no sound. An hour later, they reached a deep ravine with a rope bridge swaying in the wind. The wood planks were cracked and weathered, but it was the only direct way forward. Daniel tested the first step, feeling the bridge creak beneath his weight. He told Kara to wait until he was halfway before starting. She followed his instructions, gripping the side ropes tightly. The boy clung to her back as the bridge groaned over the void. When they reached the far side, Daniel cut one of the ropes behind them, making the bridge collapse into the ravine. Beyond the ravine, the forest thinned, and the lights they had seen earlier glowed brighter. As they crept closer, Daniel began to make out the shapes of small huts built into the hillside. Figures moved between them, some carrying tools, others standing guard with weapons. Kara's breath caught when she saw a flag stitched with the old symbols of her people. She turned to Daniel, her voice low. telling him that no imperial outpost would dare fly such a banner. A figure stepped from behind a hut and raised a hand in greeting. Daniel tensed, ready to fight if needed, but the man called out in a language Kira understood. She replied quickly, and the man's tense stance softened. He beckoned them forward, and as they approached, Daniel could see others emerging from the huts. Their faces were wary but not hostile. The man introduced himself as a leader of a small free settlement hidden in mountains, a place where no imperial soldier had set foot in years. They were given food and a place by the central fire to rest. Kara cradled the boy as he ate, his small face lit by the flames. Daniel stayed alert even while eating, scanning the settlement for weaknesses. The leader spoke of the constant threat of discovery and how they relied on secrecy more than strength to survive. Daniel listened and offered what he knew of the Empire's patrol routes. The man's eyes lit with interest, knowing this knowledge could help protect his people. Later, when most of the camp had gone to sleep, Daniel and Kara sat by the dying fire. She told him that when they left the city, she had not expected to see another dawn, yet here they were. Daniel replied that he had only wanted to break his own chains, but now he had broken hers as well. He told her that freedom was worth the fight, no matter the cost. She placed her hand over his, her eyes steady, and said they would face whatever came next together. Above them, the night sky stretched wide and clear, the stars untouched by the Empire's reach. For the first time since his capture, Daniel felt the weight of the chains gone from his wrists and from his mind. Beside him, Kara held her son close, her gaze fixed on the horizon, as if already seeing a future worth walking toward. Around them, the camp slept in peace, unaware that its newest arrivals had brought with them the will to keep that peace alive.